A blustery winter's day, yet one man leaves the warmth of his home to search for pine branches for a mid-year Christmas celebration. What he was to find would set a community and its police officers on edge for months to come.
It was up to us to deliver that killer so that people can get on with their lives.
And as she approached the toilet block on the footpath, she noticed a male coming from the toilet block area.
There's got to be something wrong. There's no reason for why this woman has gone missing.
We didn't want to give the impression that there was a serial killer on the run.
Whoever the killer was at this stage had developed an appetite for her.
That piece of skin was going to hold a vital clue for the investigators.
You can lie to me, but you can't lie to God.
Are you responsible for the deaths of any of these women?
When a young girl's body was found in this park in the teeming rain, police had the odds stacked against them. They would need to call upon all of their investigative and forensic skills to solve a crime that even today sends chills down the spines of those who lived through it.
We were called out about 8 o'clock that evening, an absolutely horrific night. We had a major downpour of rain and wind, and that was a major concern for us.
The potential for loss of evidence is enormous in an external scene like that. The biological evidence that we would have been looking for would have been blood and basically other body fluids, but given the conditions, the likelihood was that we weren't going to find those.
So the offender in this case couldn't have asked for a better night from his perspective to commit the crime, and it caused us great problems that we virtually didn't glean much evidence from the scene at all.
The deceased was obviously a young female. She was laying face up, and there was a very small tree branch laying across the body. I have no reason why that was put there. It certainly didn't disguise the body at all. In terms of a sexual assault, her pants and lower body clothing were intact, but the upper body was exposed. There was significant and massive wounds to the throat, which were the obvious cause of death to me at that time.
The autopsy examination revealed that she had a number of bruises and abrasions on the arms and hands, which suggests there may have been attempts at defence. However, there were no injuries to suggest that her arms and hands had come in contact with a knife or other sharp instrument.
It suggested that the victim had lost consciousness before she was attacked with the knife, and tiny pinpoint blood clots were the telltale signs.
Around the eyes and present within the tissue lining the inside of the eyelids were some small hemorrhages known as petechial hemorrhages, and they are consistent with her having had strangulation occurring during life. There were some minor injuries suggesting the body had been moved and possibly dragged.
It was an insight into the murderer's method of killing. But marks on the victim's chest were a further and troubling signature.
There was no bruising or bleeding present within the soft tissues. These features suggest that these injuries occurred after death.
What caused me concern, and all of us concerned in the team, was this crisscross on the chest. Is it satanic? Have we got just a thrill killer? Why has he done it? He, she, because it's not gender-based.
As detectives learnt of an 18-year-old reported missing, crime scene examiners continued their search.
Next morning, the weather was much better. Rain had stopped, and it was much more suitable for searching a crime scene. In an area not far from where the body had been, there was a blue and white sports bag which contained a number of school books, and a number of those books were in the name of Elizabeth Stevens.
Elizabeth Stevens' body was found in a drain late on Saturday at Lloyd Recreation Reserve, less than half a kilometre from her home. Originally from Hobart, she was completing her VCE at Frankston TAFE and was living with her uncle at Langwarrin.
We couldn't believe it, that it was her. We kept expecting her to walk through the front door.
Homicide detectives have very few leads in the investigation and are yet to establish a motive for the brutal killing. They're now trying to piece together Elizabeth Stevens' movements.
Piecing together the movements of your victim is absolutely paramount for us. We knew that she'd left a note for her uncle and auntie, that she was going to the TAFE College library. She gave an estimated time of return of 8 o'clock. So we knew she had travelled and placed herself down at the Frankston CBD. We were able to establish that Elizabeth made a call to her sister and she was going to go visit her the next day.
Are we still on for shopping tomorrow?
And we know that call was made from the CBD of Frankston.
The police would now turn to the public for their help. But at one house, they were going to get more than they expected.
When I said there was significant blood, there was significant blood in the house. We were confident we were on a winner.
The body of 18-year-old Elizabeth Stevens was found in a park not far from her home. There seemed little motive as to why she had been so brutally murdered. The police needed to piece together her last movements, and for that, they would rely on the public.
Any investigation we undertake, we rely so heavily on the cooperation and assistance from the public. There's only few of us, but many of them.
Police hope this mannequin, dressed in clothes similar to those worn by Elizabeth Stevens on the night she disappeared, will jog the memory of anyone who may have seen the teenager near the Frankston TAFE last Friday night.
We did pamphlets and roadblocks where we set up a mannequin dressed in similar clothes, and that led to witnesses coming forward, and that pieced together for us the places that Elizabeth had been. One was at a takeaway food bar, which was in the heart of Frankston. We had another sighting at the TAFE College, probably around 7 o'clock that evening. We then had to satisfy ourselves, how did she get back to the location where she's in fact found? And the bus was the most obvious form of transport. Was she followed by someone from the cafe that she went to? Did someone travel on the bus with her?
While the calls kept coming in from the public, Charlie Bazina and his team were door-knocking the area. And when they stopped at one house, they thought they'd hit the jackpot.
There was one particular house we went to where this particular individual at the house slammed the door in our face, and police arouses our suspicion. As a result of that, we get into the house and there was blood everywhere. So in finding the house as we did, immediately we treat that as a crime scene. And as it turned out, this guy had just self-mutilated and that was it. But that caused us a lot of man-hours to eliminate him as a potential suspect.
The detectives were virtually back to square one.
So you go from your peak back down to a trough. And then we had the crushing news that we learnt of a woman being reported missing from the Frankston area.
More than 100 SES officers joined police in an intense search today for any trace of Deborah Ann Freem.
They're tearing us apart. She's got a son here that's 12 days old. We just can't handle it.
All reports were that Debbie was a loving, caring mother, happy about the fact that she had a new baby on the scene.
She loves her child. She loves me. Since the birth, it's just been unreal. You know, life couldn't be better until this.
There was considerations of, because she was a new mum, was she suffering from postnatal depression?
It seemed unlikely, and more so as the night she disappeared, Debbie had a friend over for dinner.
And that at some stage Debbie had run out of milk and had said that she was going down to the local shop to purchase milk, and she's left her baby with a family friend and had gone off to get the milk and hadn't been seen since. I'm thinking to myself, there's something wrong. There's got to be something wrong. There's no obvious reason for why this woman's gone missing.
Debbie's disappearance took on a more sinister tone, considering on the same night, only a train station away and less than 2 hours before, another woman had been assaulted.
As she approached the toilet block on the footpath, she noticed a male coming from the toilet block area. She didn't take a lot of notice of him. Shortly after that, she felt a person grab her from behind. And then he threatened her and suggested that he had a firearm or a pistol, which he'd put against her head. Rosa offered an expensive ring to the man, and he didn't take it. Finally, with a big push, broke free, ran out towards the road with him chasing her.
Luckily for her, the car stopped.
While Rosa Toth escaped and was now safe at home, police were still searching for 22-year-old Debbie Freem.
Myself and one of my other colleagues had decided that because we knew Debbie had gone to get milk, we were going down to check the local milk bars, and we were travelling back to the office when I saw a silver car fitting the description of Debbie's in Madden Street, just outside the Christian Life Centre, I think it's called. There was a V-shaped dent in the bonnet which indicated that she may have been involved in an accident.
Police are also appealing to anyone who may have information about an accident involving Debbie's silver pulsar found 2 kilometres from home late yesterday.
According to Debbie's de facto, it didn't have that damage when he left it on Thursday.
We examined the car at that time and took photos of the car. The weather was closing in, so it was important to remove the car as quickly as possible. So we then took it to the Forensic Science Laboratory and put it undercover there for further examination. The damage to the front of the car extended from the top of the bonnet down through the grille to the number plate. This indicated to me that it had struck an upright object, possibly a street or road sign, a fence, something fairly tall.
To identify what Debbie's car hit and get a possible lead on where Debbie was, the number plate, which had tiny orange smears on it, was removed for testing.
I examined the substance using a very high-powered microscope to analyse the elemental composition. This was not paint or plastic or timber-based, but related somewhat possibly to a soil or to crushed rock or even brick.
It was more than likely that Debbie's car had hit a brick wall. But was it on her way to get the milk or after? No milk, no groceries, or her purse were found in the car. But other ominous clues were there.
When I examined the car, I noticed that the driver's seat was in a reclining position and pushed nearly all the way back. I gained the impression somebody larger than Debbie drove the car to Madden Street. I also found what appeared to be blood on a blade of grass sitting on the passenger side seat, and I found what appeared to be blood on the driver's seat.
The blood was that of Debbie Freem. But who had driven the car to Madden Street? Was the young mother missing or murdered?
Police have been sent to Carrum Downs, where a woman's body was found a short time ago. It was discovered in grazing land between Wedge Road and Thompson's Road.
Taylor's Road's an unmade road, and it's got grazing paddocks either side of the road, and the body was found between the trees and the wire fence of the paddock. It was suspected that it was the body of Debbie Freem, who had been missing for 2 or 3 days, and whose car we had found in Madden Street in Frankston.
Residents in the Bayside suburbs of Seaford and Frankston are living in terror following the second stabbing murder in recent weeks. The body of Deborah Ann Freem was found beside a dirt road in farmland at Carrum Downs, 10 kilometres from her Seaford home.
Unfortunately, there was nothing at the scene to indicate who the offender might have been. We were still up in the air at that stage.
But while clues to the offender weren't present, he had left telltale signs that might link him to the murder of Elizabeth Stevens, whose body was found exactly 1 month before.
The body was covered by broken branches, and even though I didn't go to the scene of Elizabeth Stevens, I knew that her body had vegetation placed on top of it too. On the grass near where Debbie was concealed, there was a large amount of blood. This indicated to me that she was killed and then hidden behind the bushes. Her dress was pulled up around a midriff and her underclothing was intact, the same as Elizabeth Stevens.
She's died from multiple stab wounds, not only to the neck region, to the, as I said before, the upper body, in what can only be described as a frenzied attack. When Debbie Freem's body was discovered and after the post-mortem examination, we're in a position to compare the sort of injuries and the post-mortem injuries from that victim against the first case. And what we did notice was that there was evidence of strangulation, there was a similar pattern of stab wounds, there were post-mortem injuries. So whilst there were a number of indicators that certainly led us to believe that there was a possibility it could be the same killer, we didn't want to give the impression that there was a serial killer on the run.
The problem facing the police was that 2 other young women had also been murdered in the area within the last 3 years.
The body of 25-year-old Michelle Brown was found in March last year, and Sarah McDermott was abducted from Cannock Railway Station in 1990. Her body was never found.
The connection to a serial killer was inevitable.
If there is a serial killer at work here, it's places like this where he stalks his prey. This area is full of young women and single mothers, people who used to feel safe here, but no longer.
My husband won't let me out after dark unless I've got one of the dogs with me.
Suburbia is not a safe place to live anymore.
I have to go with my husband, I don't feel safe with a girlfriend.
Your friend's up the road, but you're too scared to go and see them.
The bad guys are winning and that makes you angry.
I go to the nightclubs and that, and there aren't that many single girls going there now, because it's too dangerous for them to be out at night time.
Police are pouring resources into finding the murderer, who may well be a serial killer.
It was clear that a lot of people in Frankston were frightened, too frightened to go out at night.
We were all expecting another murder. You know, it was just this, whoever the killer was at this stage had developed an appetite for it. The most important thing was to try and catch the killer. You publicise the locations of caravans, as many photos of Elizabeth and Debbie, information about the car that she was driving, anything that might lead to the killer.
A number of people rang in as a result of police to the community from the media. Witnesses that came forward said that they'd seen a tall man return to the vehicle after it had been located in Madden Street and enter the vehicle and take some goods from it. Some of the other reports we got indicated that Debbie was seen in the vehicle with a male, that the vehicle was driving erratically through the streets of Frankston. There'd been some attempt to flash high beam, which gave the investigators their first clues that Debbie had in fact been abducted. We were confident that the offender had driven the vehicle back to Madden Street, and the main clue it gave us was we thought he lived within a walking vicinity of that area. And in order to flush out a potential offender or suspect, we called upon the services of our criminal profiler.
I was asked to have a look at the 2 murders that had occurred to that point to see if I could provide some insight in relation to the particular individual that might be involved in committing these murders. Typically, serial killers start their killing between the ages of 18 to 24. These kinds of individuals have a very rich fantasy life. They get pleasure out of fantasising about selecting their victims, the kind of victims and how they're going to kill them and what they're going to experience during the killing. So if you're fantasising almost every minute of your waking life, it's very difficult to hold down a meaningful job. There was enough information, enough evidence available to me to conclude the killer was a local. You don't go and commit a murder in an area that you're totally uncomfortable with, because that would be your greatest exposure. So he would fit into the local community. He wouldn't attract attention. It was perfect for him.
From that information, the police produced a questionnaire and were going to target an area in Frankston where the profiler believed the killer might live. But just as they were about to commence the door knock, another young girl went missing. In less than 8 weeks, 2 young women had been killed, both in a similar and brutal way. There seemed little doubt that a serial killer was at work. The police had little to go on, but they had bombarded the area with extra officers, warning its residents to be careful, especially at night. And now, 17-year-old school student Natalie Russell was missing.
Normally Natalie rode her bike to school, and because it was raining, I said, I'd take him. So I dropped her off at school, and I'd always said to Natalie, ring me, if you want to lift home. Anyway, there was no call, so I just presumed that she got into Frankston, which she often did. And anyway, when the bus came, 6:15, Natalie wasn't on it. I was a bit concerned about that. The next bus came, a little after 7. And when she wasn't on that, I said, Brian, something's wrong.
When I went to the house, I went inside and spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Russell. I remember Mrs. Russell was, she was very nervous. I remember she was wringing her hands a lot, she was. And I think she was thinking that something terrible might have happened. I think, as we all did on the night, we had a photo of the girl. We took a full description of what she was wearing, height, hair colour, length, and we immediately started asking questions about, had they rung any of her friends, which they had, and no one had seen her since 2:30 when she had left school.
Across the road from Natalie's school was a bike track between two golf courses, a shortcut that many students, like Natalie, would take to get to their homes. It was the logical place to start their search.
We were taken to the spot where there was a large cut in the cyclone fence right up against one of the galvanised poles. The first thing I noticed was some bloody handprints along the pole, and as I walked into the bush and I saw a school bag, which all the kids from the college have, and then as I turned around the corner further, I saw a pair of black stockings and then the school uniform. One would assume straight away that it would be Natalie.
And I said, is it a female? And they said yes. And I said, school clothes on? They said yes. I said, John Paul College school clothes? They said, I said, well, it's not Natalie, because I said Natalie was too strong. She wouldn't let anyone hurt her or kill her.
I can say from looking at the scene what I saw, Natalie put up one hell of a fight. The ground was where she'd kicked all the grass underneath was down to bare earth. She'd certainly struggled well, but unfortunately he just overpowered her.
The body of 17-year-old VCE student Natalie Russell was discovered at 11 o'clock last night, just over 2 hours after police launched an intensive search of the area when her family reported her missing. The killing follows the two earlier murders of Deborah Freem 3 weeks ago and Elizabeth Stevens on June the 12th. Detectives confirmed that she died from multiple stab wounds to the upper body. They are looking at the obvious similarities between the attacks.
The similarities with the other two victims were quite evident, but the striking difference in this particular scenario was that the offender had become more brazen, become more of a risk taker. Clearly hadn't decided to strike at night.
Just the way he'd cut a hole in the fence, and obviously it was someone just walking past, he would have just reached out and grabbed them and dragged them in, like, just, and a well-used track too. It was just a brazen act.
The following morning, forensic investigators searched the area where Natalie's body lay. They hoped that this crime scene, unlike the other two, would provide evidence that would identify their killer.
We noticed the hole in the fence on the western side of the track had been cut, and further down the track there was another hole in the fence and also one on the eastern side. I collected samples of wire that had been cut from these holes. The cut wire was very significant because if we were able to find a tool, we could match that up to the cut wire at the scene. In the hole at the northern end of the track, there was an amount of blood smeared on a fence post. The blood may have belonged to the offender, but it could also have come from Natalie as well. In behind this hole, there was a bushy area where the body of the deceased was laying. And up near her head were a couple of small leather straps, very, very light type leather, similar to straps that are used on binoculars. These were stained with blood, and if they had have been used for the purpose of strangulation, they would have broken as they appear to have done.
The autopsy was also showing positive leads.
Within the largest of the neck injuries, a 2.7 by 0.5 centimetre piece of skin was discovered. This skin, when examined, had ridges on it, suggesting that it had come from the hand, and there were no equivalent injuries present on Natalie Russell.
That piece of skin was going to hold a vital clue for the investigators, because what it was able to do was provide a DNA match between the offender and the crime scene, a nexus between Natalie and whoever killed her.
SES workers and police continue the search for clues today. Dozens of golfers were turned away as police closed the courses and sealed off an area covering more than 3 square kilometres.
We're certainly interested in hearing from anybody who may have seen a person, or male person in particular, loitering around the golf course.
That plea would be answered by a young cop fresh out of the academy. His notebook would hold the missing piece of the puzzle the detectives so desperately needed. The small community of Frankston, only an hour away from Melbourne, was the target of a serial killer.
It was up to us to deliver that killer so that people can get on with their lives.
The criminal profiler suggested the murderer was 18 to 24, unemployed and a local. Police were now door-knocking a particular area in which they believed the killer lived.
More than 150 detectives from almost every Victorian police squad joined forces in Bayside Frankston today to begin Operation Pulsar.
As the door knock began, Detective Wilson learned of a potential and exciting lead.
2 young constables came to the task force office reporting an incident they'd been called to the previous day, the day that Natalie Russell went missing.
We received a call to attend Sky Road in Frankston for a suspicious vehicle, and when we got there we saw a Toyota Corona, a yellow kind of car.
It was parked opposite the bike track that Natalie and her schoolmates used and had been reported to the police by a postie.
On Friday around about 3 o'clock I was on my round just about finished. It was knock-off time for school and I saw a car without any registration plates on the back. There was a bloke in the car with his arms crossed and he slouched down to try and hide, under the steering wheel. And I just kept going till I found a house that I knew someone was home, so I went in there, called the police.
When we got there was no one at the car, it had no registration plates, and we noticed a interim registration label on the front windscreen. I noted the registration down, and then we decided to have a look around at some of the houses that were on the same side of the street as the car. So we did a bit of a door knock, had a bit of a look across the road, there was no one around, so we just made sure that we had all the details right from the car, and then we left.
The following day they brought that information to our attention, and that was a significant breakthrough. I felt quite optimistic about 2 main issues here. This person was right at the scene when the killing occurred, so we either had potentially a first-grade witness, or we were for the first time in this investigation, we had a real suspect we could look at.
The car was registered to a Paul Charles Denyer, and his flat was smack in the middle of the area police and their profiler had targeted.
We knocked at the door and Paul invited us into his flat. He was quite relaxed. He was extremely friendly, eager to answer our questions, very, very cooperative. I noticed that he had a number of cuts on his fingers, and I invited Paul to come back to the police station at Frankston.
Before continuing, I must inform you that you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given in evidence. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
What is your age and date of birth?
I'm 21 years old. I was born on the 14th of April 1972.
Okay. Are you an Australian citizen?
Yep.
Are you currently employed?
No, I'm unemployed at the present time.
All we'd like to do, Paul, is if you could just run through, starting with yesterday morning.
I got up in the morning about 20 to 8, 7:30, 20 to 8.
Right.
Sharon was running.
During the questioning with Paul Denyer, Paul was consistent with his the way he'd answered questions back at his flat.
As I was coming down, say past Kringle Drive, I noticed temperature gauge started to go right up to high. So I just pulled over in Sky Road,
yeah.
And right across the road is, your golf course and everything. So I pulled up there and I checked under the car, under the bonnet, and found out the hose had come loose.
When we saw you down at your flat this afternoon, I noticed a number of cuts on your fingers.
Yeah.
Can you just put your hands flat on the desk here, so that just right up here. This injury here is a long sort of a cut. just explain how you got that injury and when you got that injury?
I got it yesterday when I was working on the car.
How are you saying it occurred?
Well, the fan spins this way, so
Yeah.
if I'm standing at the front of the car, like here, fan spins that way, the alternator sits there, and there's some wires running down underneath the bottom of the radiator. There's a wire at the top, which was for a light that I just recently put on. And it must have been when I was putting my hand down there, I caught the fan.
Why did you have it running at that stage when you were checking the radiator?
Clumsy worker on cars.
As Paul Denyer willingly recounted his day's events, his flat was being searched.
I then went to his flat and was part of the search party in executing a warrant, and the things we then found there.
At the flat, the team collected knives and various pieces of clothing, and from the car, binoculars without a strap. And amongst his many and varied tools, a pair of pliers.
Just build up our excitement in relation to say, well, we're confident it wasn't another one that I mentioned earlier, the chap that we found, a slanted door in our face. I think we're onto the right guy here.
To know that, those pliers were taken to the forensic laboratory where they were used to cut sample pieces of wire. Every pair of pliers has its own individual and distinctive cutting edge, just like every person has an individual fingerprint. Any wears or imperfections on the blade are reflected on the ends of the wire it cuts. So when these sample wires were examined under a microscope against the cut wire brought back from the bike track, they matched.
Are you aware that a girl was found murdered in Frankston?
Yeah.
Today being Saturday?
Yeah.
When did you first become aware of that?
Well, I saw some police cars and everything when I was driving up Sky Road this morning, and SES workers.
So you saw SES workers and all that in Sky Road?
Yeah. And they had some white tape across the walkway. And I saw you.
You saw me?
Yeah, I saw you, and I saw the other guy.
And that was, what were you doing when you saw that? Where were you going, or what were you doing?
Oh, we were going up to the wreckers.
He seemed to be able to have an answer for every occasion, where he was, what he did, which certainly gave rise to suspicion because nobody has that sort of recall, in my view.
Yeah.
More disturbingly, Paul Denyer could recall every minute of every hour on the very days that Elizabeth, Debbie and Natalie were murdered.
Yesterday, your car was parked opposite the location where the body of Natalie Russell was found. On the night that Debbie Freem disappeared, you walked over to Kennedall Railway Station, missed the train and walked back. And on the night Elizabeth Stevens disappeared, you walked in a very close proximity to Lloyd Park on your way to pick up this battery. Do you think that's fairly coincidental?
Yeah, it is.
In all the circumstances?
Yeah.
Are you responsible for the deaths of any of these women?
No.
Police were continuing to interview their prime suspect, Paul Charles Denyer. Not only was his car in close proximity to the murder scene of Natalie Russell, but his flat contained evidence that linked him to that scene. His hands also had suspicious cuts.
A sample of your blood is requested for the purpose of confirming or disproving your involvement in these matters.
We asked Paul for a blood sample and a sample of other tissue so we could establish a match between skin found at the post-mortem of the Russell victim and himself, so we could tie him to the murder.
Well, we're just going to suspend the interview for a short time. Is there anything else you want, like a cup of coffee or a glass of water?
Yeah, I would like another cup of coffee. Yeah.
How do you have your coffee?
White of 2.
All right, I'll get you a cup of coffee, all right? Just have a short break.
At that particular time when he was sitting there, he was starting to realise now that blood samples were being requested and the DNA may link him to the scenes, and he knew that we didn't believe any of his story.
Do you think that's fairly coincidental?
Yeah, it is.
In all the circumstances?
Yeah.
I think he knew that the game was up, so to speak, and whilst we're waiting for our forensic experts to come and take various samples, Detective Darren O'Loughlin was looking after Paul, and Darren was wearing a cross that you could see through his shirt, and Paul asked him if he was a Christian, and conversation ensued about that.
You spoke to Detective O'Loughlin here, and you told Detective O'Loughlin that you were responsible for the murders of the three women. Is that correct? Just tell us in your own words, Paul, what happened in relation to the death of Elizabeth Stevens at Langwarrin.
I saw her get off the bus. I walked up behind her, stuck my left hand around her mouth like this, and held a gun to my head right here. I started choking her with my hands, and she passed out after a while. And then I pulled out the knife, and I dragged her to where she was found. Then I threw 2 branches on her body.
Can you tell me why you attacked her on that night?
Just had the feeling, that's all.
What sort of feeling? Can you possibly describe it, where you had this feeling?
Just wanted to kill.
Once he'd made the decision to admit the offence, he didn't hold back anything. You could see that he was very willing to recount everything that had occurred.
Yeah. Okay, can you tell us what happened here?
Well, the car was sitting over there.
This is Debbie Freem's car we're talking about.
Yeah, Pulsar.
Right.
I was walking down this road here.
Right.
Saw her jump out of the car.
Yes.
Ran into the milk bar here. So I jumped in the back seat of the car.
Right.
And the car was directly across the road, so I could see her from inside the car in there.
What caused you to select her at that time?
Just that go feeling.
Right. So what happened then?
And then she came out. While I was crouched down, I could hear her footsteps coming closer to the car. And she hopped in the car, but she didn't see me in the back. And she went to do a U-turn, pulled out the gun that I had, just as she was doing that turn. She kept going straight into this wall.
What did you hit?
Could be there. Which caused a dent on the bonnet.
Right.
And then you drove off down this Cannon Avenue?
Yeah, down that way.
He was totally removed from the circumstances of what occurred. It's like it didn't happen for him. He was explaining it outside himself.
He then took Debbie to Taylor's Road, where he strangled and then killed her with a knife, like he did with Elizabeth Stevens.
I dragged her about a metre into the trees and where she was lying against the fence. And I broke off 2 branches off the nearest tree and threw them over her body. And I hopped back in the car again and I adjusted the seat to match my height because she was a lot smaller than me, and headed back to Madden Street. Why to Madden Street? Wasn't too close, wasn't too far from home.
The next morning, just as witnesses described, Paul Denyer went back to Debbie's car and grabbed her groceries and purse.
I wanted to see what her name was and everything out of her wallet, so I took it up to the golf course and buried it.
So you'd be able to show us where that is?
Exactly.
And how would you be able to find the spot?
I'll find it.
You brought us up the track to this point where you've just kindly cut the fence open for us.
Yep.
This is the area in here where you've indicated the purse is.
Yes.
He's digging around it. You know, like, really, we could have just said, relax, Paul. It'll be here. If you say it's here, it'll be here, you know. But he was frantically digging because it was like we weren't going to believe him.
I should have a shovel.
Just hold it there, just shake a bit of the mud off if you can, mate. So that's the location where you buried the purse?
Yep.
And who does that purse belong to?
Debbie Frame.
I'll put it in the bag.
3 weeks later, he returned to the track.
Yep.
What can you tell me about this?
I went up there earlier that day and cut the holes in the fences.
What did you use to cut the holes in the fences?
Pair of pliers. I stood here and watched Natalie Russell walk around the corner, and I went through this hole and waited behind the trees there.
Right.
Until I saw her walk past here and heading that way.
Right.
And when she got about 10 metres down the track here, I came out of the fence.
As we're walking along here,
Mm.
are you still maintaining that distance behind her?
No, I was getting closer each time. I walked along the grass like this, wouldn't make a sound.
So you wouldn't be heard?
Yeah. I was armed with a red-handled knife.
Where'd that come from?
From my place.
Is that all you had?
Yeah.
Just a red-handled knife?
Oh, and a leather strap. You would have found it at the scene, in 2 pieces.
What was that used for?
Strangling.
What was that from?
There was a strap off a pair of binoculars I had at home. I grabbed her here around the mouth,
Yeah.
in the left hand, like this.
Yeah.
I dragged her through here.
Absolutely no remorse for what he did. The candour of his confessions were chilling, and the way he was able to describe what he'd done to these poor victims without any sort of emotion, it was quite an amazing journey.
What did you want to kill her for?
Same reason as before. No, I've always wanted to kill.
Since when?
Since I was about 14.
Apart from his callous descriptions of the 3 murders, he also admitted to assaulting Rosa Toth on the same night as he killed Debbie Freem.
This is some weeks after Elizabeth Stevens.
Yeah, I was just, like every day, I was just going up, boiling up, till I got to that stage.
Were you armed with the same weapon?
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same weapon?
Was that the weapon you used when you first approached Elizabeth Stevens?
Yeah, that's the one.
And the same with Deborah Freem?
Yep.
Same as the woman at Seaford Railway Station?
Yep.
If that lady hadn't have got away, what would have happened to her?
I would have killed her.
Rosa wasn't the only lucky one.
I've been stalking women for a few years.
Right.
In Frankston. Just waiting for that opportunity.
Right.
Waiting for the sign.
Right.
Paul Denya's confession had lasted just over 5 hours.
21-year-old unemployed man Paul Charles Denyo was charged at the Frankston police station at 9 o'clock this morning. The station was under tight security as Denyo was driven away in a divisional van escorted by a second police car.
When I went back under the task force room, I can assure you there was absolute elation. There was cheering and, quite a lot of, positive comments being made.
And I suppose, given all the time we'd put in, the victims that I'd seen, the elation was just so great. We all went back to, in the early hours of the morning, to a hotel, had a couple of beers in the wee hours of the morning and went home.
And then when it was over, he stood up and he walked all along and he spotted me and he just stood there and stared at me and said, "I'm sorry." And I thought, well, you can lie to me, but you can't lie to God.
Right now, Paul Denya is behind those high walls under maximum security, serving a minimum sentence of 30 years. So, having murdered 3 young women and abducting another Denya could be out on the streets at the age of 51.
That was just a real kick in the teeth as far as we were concerned. That he could do that to these young women, and the law would basically give him a lousy 30 years for 3 murders.
Because how many times has it happened? They get out, they'll do it again. There's just no way that he won't do it again.
That's what he is. He's just a murderer.